we are getting closer and closer to the beginning here of a long time of severe weather across portions of the south central and southeast. You're looking at some pretty significant severe weather for Friday and Saturday here. We already have two large, widespread, slight risks for day 2 and day 3, most likely both going to enhance risk, and as well watching concerning threat for severe weather next week here on the 10-year anniversary of the 27th and 28th outbreak from 2011 here, looking really favorable, very far out already for some significant severe weather and possibly even an outbreak with a growing 15% chance here, looking at possibly a very big outbreak ahead of us next week here. But without further ado, let's get in the video. So here's a look here at the latest day 2 outlook for the first day of this long week here of severe weather. So it's going to be, I guess, since we have already had over a week and a half of dead severe weather, very quiet, it seems if it's the monster such as Tornado Alley is starting to wake up here. And here's our first example of that happening here on day 2. A very, very widespread slight risk, including not only Tornado Alley, but once again portions of western Dixie Alley, including Louisiana and Mississippi there. But this slight risk is very large, so there's a very good chance, and it's bound to have an enhanced risk at least some point here, an enhanced risk for portions of eastern Texas and western Louisiana, and possibly even portion there southern Oklahoma is where I'm really watching for an enhanced risk for day 2 here. Not sure if I'm going to stream on this. I will let y'all know tomorrow whether I'm going to stream on this event here, but we have 25, almost 26 million people under this slight risk. So a lot of people, including Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, Austin, Fort Worth, a lot of big cities there across portions of Texas, and as well as includes Oklahoma City, Norman, Shreveport, Monroe, all the way up to Jackson, Mississippi there. We do have a pretty large tornado threat here, a very large 2%, including that slight risk there. Again, around 21 million people under that 2% chance, all the way from portions of from Oklahoma City to portions of Montgomery, Alabama. So we have a very large 2% chance, and obviously 2% chance is not anything too crazy, anything too concerning, but we have had tornadoes, of course, from 2% chances, and we've actually had 2 tornadoes and when there wasn't even a 2% chance. So just if you're in a 2% chance, I wouldn't say like, I guess, have a shelter ready for that day, but again, just have a plan ready. So when there is a tornado, so if there is a tornado warning in your area, or if there is a tornado in your area and you're not ready, just make sure you have a plan before that event actually happens there. So that includes areas like Houston, Dallas, Austin, Fort Worth, and Oklahoma City. But we also now have 2 areas where we have a 5% chance for tornadoes here. So we have one in southern Oklahoma and northern Texas, and a very large 5% chance here as well, going from portions of eastern and central Texas to portions of south central Mississippi there. So watching as well tornado threat across Mississippi and Louisiana actually has some pretty high numbers on the STP here, and that will continue to be a trend here as we go into Georgia, Alabama for day 3 here. So we do have around 6.2 million people in the 5% chance, including Shreveport, Jackson, Mississippi, Waco, Texas, Norman, Oklahoma there, so where the SPC is located there. Went through as well. We have 2 areas kind of surrounding the Dallas and Fort Worth area. You guys are just outside, so DFW, you guys are kind of squished between the higher risk for severe weather, including wind and tornadoes, and as well the hail though is going to be pretty big and a potent threat there across portions of the DFW, where we'll be seeing those higher lapse rate values. But we do have 2 areas of 50% chance for some pretty significant wind gusts within these supercells and storms, and this includes around 7 million people. Once again, Oklahoma City there, Norman, Wichita, Texas, Jackson, and Shreveport. So even watching the threat for some severe weather across areas of Mississippi and Louisiana. So if you're in those areas, Jackson, Louisiana, you guys are kind of right on the edge of that, or some areas are kind of around the edge of that slight risk. You're kind of thinking, hey, I'm used to enhanced and moderate and even high risk, so why should I get ready for a slight risk? Well, there is possibly maybe a chance you guys can get deeper into the slight risk, and be possibly depending whether you live in Jackson or whether you live in Shreveport or whatever, there is possibly going to be a chance for an enhanced risk to be issued within your areas. So just keeping a very close eye on that. As well, watching another day there, day 3, a very, very large slight risk here, and I'm actually just after the slight risk right here, so I'm actually coming almost on the edge of the slight risk, and I should be extended into it later today or tomorrow. But we do have a slight risk here as the severe weather is gonna start making its way towards the east here. So obviously Texas, Tornado Alley, and portions of the western Dixie Alley will be tomorrow evening, overnight. And then, of course, by Saturday, it'll make its way towards the east here and continue bringing in possibly some threats, such as possibly tornadoes. Specifically in this area, we're going to be watching out for some tornadoes, as well as some pretty severe gusts. And I don't see too big of a hail threat for day 3 here. But we do have around 18 million people under this level to slight risk, and I do think there is possibly going to be a chance for an enhanced risk on the, I guess, the western side of the slight risk, possibly to western Georgia and portions of south central Alabama, is where we're going to be watching out possibly for a small enhanced risk to be issued, most likely either for maybe the winds or possibly even watching out maybe for a tornado threat here. But New Orleans, Atlanta, Montgomery, Mobile, and Columbus, you guys are in the many cities there that are under the slight risk. So we actually again have 18.5 million people in this margin as well, pretty widespread, including around 13.5 million people, including Jacksonville, Charlotte, Raleigh, Birmingham, and Baton Rouge. Of course, the most concerning day for at least the next week or so is definitely going to be day 6 here. I mean, it started at day 7, now it's at day 6 here. We have a very, very large 15% chance, and it's still growing now, including up to 12.1 million people, going all the way from almost the border with Nebraska to near the border of Mexico. So we're watching a very large slight risk already 6 days out, ladies and gentlemen. 6 days out. There most likely could possibly be a 30% chance by day 4, and that's the highest you can go on a day 4 there. So the fact that it's this large already, the large slight risk, the 15% will be slight risk, and the 30% could be enhanced or moderate, anything higher than a slight risk. So the fact that it's 15% chance so large, I mean, including much of central and north central Texas, much of Oklahoma, and much of eastern and southern and eastern portion of Kansas, and not getting its way towards possibly the border with Nebraska. Very concerning here. Of course, we don't have the obviously the probability for hail, tornadoes, or winds just yet. We have to wait till day 2 for that to happen here, but there's definitely a great chance for a widespread severe weather and possibly an outbreak on the 27th and 28th, and not just 27th and 28th, but the 27th and the 28th of April, which does ring a bell to a lot of severe weather fans or people who live in the southern United States. When I say April 27th, 28th, 2011, you guys automatically know what I'm talking about here. So this could very well be an outbreak. So the Mother Nature may be celebrating the 10-year anniversary of that major outbreak by bringing in another outbreak. So really keeping a very close eye on that, obviously. This is going to kind of be a little bit more layered towards Tornado Alley instead of Dixie Alley like last, the 27th, 28th outbreak in 2011. This one's kind of more focused towards a May-like pattern for Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and even make its way possibly towards southeastern Nebraska here. And that would even be a bigger threat by day 7. Obviously, we don't have a risk for day 7 just yet, but as we get a lot closer to the severe weather outbreak, there will be another day here for severe weather, possibly towards just to the east here as those storms move eastward. So keeping a very, very close eye on them, possibly a multi-severe weather threat, not only this week, but possibly as well at the beginning and mid next week. Since we're not close enough, let's go ahead now and check looking at the NAM 3 kilometer for Friday and Saturday's event here. Obviously, we can't go as far as next week on the NAM, but we'll be looking at the next week later on the in the video with the European model. But let's go ahead and look now at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon here. So I think this is 2 o'clock Central Time. And that's when some storms could start to fire up here. Again, there's going to be a lot of cap in the early afternoon and late morning hours across portions of Texas and Oklahoma. So a lot of that will be limited. So we will start to see some storms blowing up once that cap does break, which will most likely happen between 4 and 5 o'clock Eastern Time, meaning 3 and 4 o'clock Central Time. So kind of getting right in the time frame of that cap breaking, allowing for some storms to start blowing up. But at the beginning, they most likely will be hail. And again, they're kind of so adapting to the environment. But once we now get to 4 o'clock Central Time, that's when the storms are going to start getting pretty severe. You can see possibly some scattered supercells across northeastern Texas. They're going to be really watching out for some supercells, as well as some storms blowing up there as far north as portions of Kansas again. We do have, of course, a slight risk as far as the Oklahoma City metro. Going to be seeing some pretty intense storms there. Once we now get 8 o'clock Central Time, you can kind of see we're not looking at anything too tornadic, so there really won't be anything too crazy tornado-wise across northeastern Texas or anything, but really going to watch out possibly for some tornadoes. Once we get into portions of Louisiana there, Mississippi, going to really watch out for some embedded supercells within this within these severe thunderstorms here. That's going to continue to be a threat there as we go later to Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. But you can kind of see some pretty intense storms as well as some potential discrete cells across northeastern Texas, or northeastern Oklahoma, sorry, not Texas, in the Tulsa region, as well as some pretty good storms there near the Lawton region, or the Lawton area there in Oklahoma. But you can kind of see pretty widespread severe weather can start ramping up there between the next between the next 24 hours or so is basically when that severe weather going to start blowing up there across eastern Texas. There could get some pretty decent storms there near Austin. Possibly some good storms there near Houston. Houston really won't get anything too crazy though, but really watching out for areas like northern Louisiana, northeastern Texas, possibly areas in some scattered portions of southern Oklahoma, and then of course that'd be a big threat or a bigger threat there as we go towards the east here for looking at now on Saturday morning here. So Saturday at 3 in the morning, we start seeing some pretty big storms here making their way to Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas. Big threat basically will be flash flooding for this event here. We're not going to be seeing any overnight big tornadoes, at least with this event. That can be a possibility for the next week event, but you kind of see not going to be anything too crazy at in the morning here, but you can get some pretty intense storms later on across portions of Georgia, Alabama, and possibly some scattered supercells across Alabama, Mississippi there, and tomorrow or on Saturday evening, as well as some pretty possibly an intense squall line across Georgia and South Carolina as well. But really not going to anything too crazy really at all either on Saturday. Again, it's going to be mainly, like I said, possibly a hail threat most likely, and possibly some wind on Saturday here. But Saturday, let's go ahead and that Friday, let's go ahead and now look at the Cape values here according to the NAM. So we start seeing some pretty good Cape values here. Once we get here at 3 o'clock again, once that cap does a break, we start seeing that Cape starting to increase here rapidly. You're going to get up to now the mid 1,000 there, 1,400, 1,500 as well. And the portion of the central and northern Texas getting as high as 2,000. And once we now get there into 7 o'clock here Eastern, so 6 o'clock Central, some pretty good chances for some severe weather across central Texas, getting over 2,000 joules per kilogram, and as well in northern Texas, going to get over 3,600 joules per kilogram. So a pretty big increase there. As we go overnight in the overnight hours, we're going to start seeing some pretty increasing large K values across portions of the Gulf Coast there, and portion of the Dixie. You can kind of see by 8 a.m. already seeing up to 2,000 joules per kilogram across in portions there in Louisiana. Areas in Alabama going to get up to possibly 2,000 plus joules per kilogram by noon. It's going to continue to increase there as we go to the afternoon hours. Very high K values across portions of the Dixie Valley and Deep South, and get over 3,000 joules per kilogram in some areas across that region, including Alabama, Mississippi there, and a portion of the Panhandle. And once we get into tomorrow afternoon or Saturday afternoon, evening, it's going to really die off as those K values will rapidly decrease here. You can get below 1,000 by as early as possibly 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock for portions of Georgia, South Carolina. But obviously going to be seeing overnight getting still over 2,000 joules per kilogram overnight into Florida and Georgia, at least southern Georgia and northern Florida, because we start seeing some pretty warm temperatures in those regions, getting up into the 80s here, actually mid 80s. But let's go ahead now. The supercell composite parameter here for Friday and Saturday, so tomorrow and Saturday. So you can see by 5 o'clock here Eastern, so Central Time, be 4 o'clock, we're going to be seeing a decent chance for supercells across portions of South Central Oklahoma, getting up to a 21. That's what it says here, 21.5, and portion of South Central Oklahoma with some widespread lower teens there, possibly 11, 12, maybe even 14 there across scattered areas of southeastern Texas. But in general, we're seeing those single digits, see a lot of widespread 5s, widespread 7s, and widespread 9s there. But as we go later on now into the evening hours, we're going to start getting a bigger threat for some supercells across north central Texas and southern Oklahoma, getting up to a 26.6 on the scale there, and still some widespread upper single digits and lower teens across eastern Texas. And it's not going to be a big supercell outbreak here, a big tornado outbreak there across portions of Texas tomorrow. It's going to be mainly possibly just there's going to be possibly a threat for tornadoes, but it really won't be extremely widespread or tornado outbreak. You're really watching out, of course, for the hail and the winds here tomorrow here. But as we get later now over into the late morning hours, and get some pretty high numbers there for supercells across the Gulf Coast and the Deep South, getting up to 20.7 there as early as 10 in the morning across southern Alabama and the western panhandle there of Florida. And we continue to go on throughout the day there. 2 o'clock, going to get up to some lower 20s and as well high teens across Alabama, Georgia, and Florida into the early afternoon hours. And as we go later into the evening hours, 6 o'clock Eastern across Georgia and portions of South Carolina, getting up into the upper teens as well, some lower 20s, 22 there just outside Macon, Georgia, and some widespread teens from Mississippi there for South Carolina. So in general, a lot of this area really will be favorable for severe weather. Doesn't mean they're all going to get supercells, but there's definitely some higher numbers on the scale because it's so favorable for severe weather development. But let's now go look at the STP value, so significant tornado parameter. So, like I did say, we're not going to be seeing a big threat for big tornadoes or overnight tornadoes. Tomorrow, we could see some scattered tornadoes there. We can see a few tornadoes, possibly a couple tomorrow across Texas, maybe a few there in Louisiana, maybe one or two there in Oklahoma. But in general, not going to be a big outbreak. But the numbers are going to be on the higher side according to the NAM here because conditions are going to be very, very favorable for some severe weather. And as well, they're going to be some pretty favorable conditions for tornadoes, leading to these numbers being pretty high. So you can get up between 9 there across forests in the south central, southwestern Louisiana, but getting up into over 6 for a pretty large spread area from southeastern Texas there across much of central and central Louisiana and into southern Mississippi there. But gonna get a lot higher, like I did say, once we get into Saturday morning there. But like I did say, not gonna see a huge crazy threat for tornadoes. Across Texas, but as you do see though, we're gonna be seeing some decent numbers as early as 4 o'clock Central Time, so 3 o'clock Central. We're gonna be seeing some scattered numbers there, possibly 3, 5, or maybe even as high as 7. So there still could be some scattered tornadoes early on the event across Central Texas. So really keep a close eye on that, and even some pretty good numbers there near North Central Texas and South Central Oklahoma. They're getting up to a 9.3, getting anywhere from 4 to 6 there across southeastern Texas. So decent, I guess. Going to keep a really close eye on those areas. And of course, that'll rapidly increase once we get towards Louisiana, Mississippi there. Let's now go toward the southeast here so you can watch out for Saturday morning. And boy, we're going to get some really high numbers, getting up to a 12 on the STP scale. 11 in the morning there for Alabama. And that number is really high. It's probably saying there's going to be a massive tornado outbreak across Alabama. Well, no, that's not going to happen here. The reason why the numbers are this high is because of how favorable the conditions are for not only for supercells, but as well, obviously, supercells could increase the chance for tornadoes. So the only reason why these numbers are this high is not because there's going to be a tornado outbreak. Obviously, we would already have like an enhanced risk at least for day 3 if this were to be true. But the NAM not only likes to overreact sometimes, but as well they don't really consider the fact there can possibly be some cap or any limiting factors here. They kind of look at the good conditions like CAPE there, dew points, temperatures, etc., and they get numbers and add all those conditions and get a number from 0 to 10. And obviously, if it gets to past 10, you probably think, holy cow. But I know these numbers and colors like freaky if you live in Mobile, if you live in Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, Jackson. Obviously, you guys still gotta watch out for some tornadoes, but don't be freaked out about these numbers here. Like at 12.06 there across portions of central Alabama. I mean, there's still gonna possibly be a threat for tornadoes on Saturday across these areas, but there's definitely not gonna be a big outbreak, and these numbers really are not as high as they're gonna be. Still a little bit on the lower side here for tornadoes on Friday and Saturday themselves here. But these numbers, of course, don't get freaked out. But of course, there still is going to be a chance for tornadoes across these areas, specifically, of course, Alabama, Mississippi, and portions of Georgia for Saturday. But again, don't freak out because of the numbers, because the NAM likes to overreact sometimes. But look at that, getting up to near 10 near Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, if you're in Atlanta, please don't freak out. Still be on your lookout for Saturday because there is possibly some intense storms in that area for Saturday across central Georgia and southern Georgia. But of course, again, these numbers are fairly high to what they are actually going to be here. But let me go ahead and look at the pivotal weather here real quick. Let's go ahead and look at pivotal weather here on the cap here. So let's go ahead and look here at 15Z here on the 23rd, which is going to be tomorrow here. So this is kind of going to be I believe, early afternoon, late morning here. You can kind of see there's going to be pretty good amount of cap here across portions of Texas and Oklahoma. And like I did say, that's why some storms really won't develop till 3 or 4 o'clock here. We're going to be seeing a lot of cap in that region. So going to be really limited here to a marginal threat here. I mean, still negative 128 there on cap across north central Texas. It's going to be marginal or none, which is what you're seeing here. So there could be some scattered discrete cells developing across far south central Texas, which we'll be seeing a little bit on the lower threat here, or lower side on the cap, but it really won't be a lot. It really won't be a big widespread threat for severe weather until basically 18Z, which is the mid afternoon here. So that's when things will start to blow up here across Texas. Very, very low cap in general. And let's go down to east central Texas, looking at a tornado threat there. 1500 Cape, Pretty good lifted index there. Storm relativity is a little bit on the lower side. But in general, an increasing threat for severe weather. Let's now go towards the Austin region. You can kind of see there we got a tornado threat. 1300 Cape, negative 7 lifted index. Storm velocities actually pretty good, 194. I mean that's kind of still I guess a little bit on the lower side, but I mean it's a lot better than that last sounding we looked at to the north of this sounding. 69 degrees, 68 dew points. So it's kind of the reason why um that's probably the reason why that storm relativity is so low, because how closely related those temperatures and dew points are. Like, again, critical angle. I mean, this photograph's actually not looking too good and really all over the place there in that wind in the higher atmosphere. Let's actually now go into portions now. You see Oklahoma. It's gonna be fairly capped all the way up into the mid afternoon or mid evening hour. So it's not gonna start getting crazy, at least severe weather wise, across Oklahoma till later into the deep overnight hours here, maybe 9, 10 o'clock here, and that's when the severe weather is going to start becoming a little bit more favorable, but still going to be seeing a little bit on the lower side for Cape. I'm really been watching that for northeastern and eastern Texas in general. Going to be seeing a lot more favorable conditions for some tornadoes if there is going to be any, because that Cape's going to be very low. I mean, we're below 1,000 there. I mean, storm activity is very low. So in general, not going to be too favorable for strong or widespread tornadoes at all. There could be some scattered supercells that could somehow develop some good tornadic conditions, but in general, it's going to be overall not that big of a tornado threat here. So in some areas across South Central Texas, we see a little bit more favorable conditions there. You see 2100 Cape. Look at the you can kind of see a little bit better there with an index. But look at the storage velocities at 85, and that's absolutely trash. I mean, holy cow, that's really bad. But that's gonna go to eastern or actually western Louisiana again. Very low Cape here, but as well they're gonna be very low cap. And it's gonna start capping out overnight. But as we now go into the morning hours on Saturday, we will start to see a little bit of severe weather threat there across portions of Mississippi there, Alabama there later in the afternoon hours. Once we get into early afternoon and late morning hours across portions of the deep south. But even watching possibly a threat there for eastern Louisiana on Saturday morning, we do have 1200 Cape. Storm stability is not too bad, 233. Looking at a pretty good lifted index, pretty unstable atmosphere there. 97 beyond shear, so it's not too shabby. There's actually some really high amount of shear there. 44 knots there shear, 3 kilometers, and getting up to the 60 plus in the higher atmosphere. So pretty good here. We actually do have a decent amount of spin in the atmosphere according to the photograph. So I mean, not too shabby at all for eastern Louisiana, central Louisiana as well. Watching out for some decent readings. Again, a little bit on the lower side for Cape, but getting over 300 on the storm felicity. So not bad at all. Let's now go towards eastern and portion of southern Mississippi there. Not going to be staying too crazy, but really watching out for Louisiana there, like I did say. And let's go later into the afternoon hours across Saturday here. Gonna be really watching out for Alabama, Georgia next there. 2000 Cape, storm stability is still on the lower side. Shears as well, but on the lower side for the lower atmosphere, but getting over 84 knots there. Very high where the LCL is. And so look at Georgia, son of Georgia. Really not going to be anything too crazy. So really watching out Alabama a little bit there. Portions of western Florida, marginal severe weather threat. A little bit on the lower side for Cape. Let's go ahead and look at portion there of central and southern Mississippi there. A little bit favorable, a little bit more, a little bit better conditions compared to the first previous hours. Looking at 1400 Cape, 184 on storm helicity. Beyond shear is not too bad, 79. But the index is -5, so not too shabby. The shear is a little bit better there at 35 knots there and 3 kilometer, and getting up in the 70s there in the higher atmosphere. So again, not going to be seeing anything too crazy on Saturday, but we do have still a decent threat for some scattered tornadoes across Texas, maybe portions of Oklahoma and Louisiana for tomorrow. So keeping a very close eye on that. All right, let's go ahead and look at the European model. We already talked about Friday and Saturday. Now let's go ahead and take a quick look here very quickly on what we're looking at next week compared to what we saw yesterday, if there's any big updates there. But once you get to 5 o'clock on Tuesday, that's when some severe storms will start to blow up here across portions of northern Texas and some scattered areas across Oklahoma and Kansas. So that's kind of, I guess, the opening time when that cap starts to break. So there is going to be a lot of cap on Tuesday in the early portion of the day there, but it looks like it's going to rapidly break according to the GFS model. It's going to allow for some pretty intense storms here overnight there. 11 o'clock, Some pretty intense storms likely across eastern Oklahoma, northern Texas, and as well some pretty intense storms there across portions of southern and eastern Kansas. So really watching out for that. But really, the biggest threat is going to be really overnight, like at 5 a.m. Some pretty darn intense storms just south of Kansas City. And a pretty big linear line of storms from Oklahoma to Texas. We have two low pressures there. We got the cold front up to the west here, that Gulf moisture coming from the south. So pretty good conditions in general for some pretty good severe weather. And definitely looks like the European and all malls and SPC in general is on that already. But let's go ahead and look at the K values here. Pretty high already considering how far it is. Or how far it is. You can kind of see by April 27th there on 2 o'clock, which is Tuesday, on the early afternoon, already getting over 2,000 joules per kilogram across western and central Oklahoma, and getting over 4,000 joules per kilogram there across central Texas. But let's go ahead there and look at the evening hours, getting at 5 o'clock here, getting it over 3,000 joules per kilogram in south central Kansas. But in general, some pretty good numbers here, K values wide, all the way from northwestern Missouri to portions of the border with Mexico. We're going to get over 2,500 joules per kilogram. So pretty good conditions in general there. But let's go all the way up to overnight hours here by 11 o'clock. Still seeing some really good numbers. I mean, even though it's deep overnight, the sun's completely gone. We're still going to be seeing some really good numbers across the Tornado Alley and getting over 2,000 joules per kilogram in some areas. So this is going to be a pretty big overnight threat here. Getting to now it's 5 a.m. Still some scattered areas that are over 2,000 joules per kilogram. So really watching out for next week here. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video and see you guys later.